Basketball, an American favorite. This sport was dominated by Jewish players until African Americans were allowed to play on the court and dominated the sport to this day. I'm going to go into the world of basketball to show who dominated the sport, but also show the racism that was involved in it. Basketball, one of the most popular sports in America. It was created in 1891 by Luther Gillick and chairman of the Physical Education Department for the School of Christian Workers and an education teacher named James Naismith. November 1st, 1946, the Jewish population was dominating the game called basketball. Before basketball was considered the NBA, it was called the ABA, and Ossie Sketchman scored the first known basket in basketball history. Jews were stereotyped to being really great at basketball, quick, small, and good at shooting. They dominated the All-Stars until the 1950s when the race suddenly changed. Starting in the 1950s, blacks made their first appearance, all starting with the great Earl Lloyd. On October 31st, 1950, he became the first African American to play basketball. When he played, many whites were concerned if a black could play. Earl joined an all-white team which made his appearance intimidating, but was welcomed. After the success of Earl, many blacks started to integrate into the social phenomenon which basketball was about to become. Ever since, the league became dominated by black faces. From there on, blacks became legends in the game, from Dr. J, Kareem, Magic Johnson, Wilt Chamberlain, and of course, Michael Jordan. Although majority of players in basketball are black, this does not mean the racism simply disappears. Magic Johnson versus Larry Bird. These two iconic basketball stars helped bring in racial war between whites and blacks in the game of basketball. Magic and Bird wasn't just the icons for this racialized tension, it was the people who were watching them. On one side, you have Magic Johnson, and behind him were black people in Boston who rooted for the 76ers, Lakers, and Detroit Pistons. These blacks were faced with racial discrimination, while on the other side, you have the whites who were scared of blacks, who supported Jim Crow and segregation. Blacks were accept how the Celtic team was majority white at the time. Isaiah Thomas even said that Larry Bird got such media coverage just because he was white. The White Watchers wanted Larry Bird to restore the game, which has been dominated by blacks for 20 years. Another form of racism is again towards blacks in basketball. What NBA owners are doing now, they are starting to recruit more European players over black players in the United States. They say that their kids need hero twos, meaning that black men cannot be a hero to a white child. They also focus on the media of white superstars like Stephen Nash and Dirk Nowitzki, who get less fouls called on, and other players who are black stay away from them so they cannot be fouled on. Announcers also seem to favor them over black superstars. A particular owner has shown how racist basketball can be. Owner of the Los Angeles Clippers, Donald Sterling, has been known for his racism against blacks. Before Elgin Baylor quit, who is the GM of the Los Angeles Clippers, Donald Sterling had paid him only $350,000. After he quit, Mike Dunleavy took over and the white coach received a 4-year, $22 million contract. Donald Sterling also has a history of paying his black players less than average. It is also known that Donald Sterling, who owns many hotels, doesn't rent to Latino Americans or blacks, nor does he sell his hotel to them. Another form of racism in basketball is the players themselves and the referees. Referees from 1991 to 2004, whom were white, were more likely to call fouls against black players than whites. Since there was a significant white crew of referees with less blacks, they were able to control the game. Players were also racist against each other. One of the greatest players to play the game, Kevin Garnett, has been deemed to be racist to other white players in the league. Several times he's been known to hit white players by elbowing in the face or accusing them of doing something wrong. In conclusion, you can see that racism in basketball exists not only from the players, but to the commentators and to all the way to the executive board itself. One question still arises: what can we do to end the racism? The only thing we can do is to teach the newer generation that racism is bad, and hopefully, with the years to go on, racism will be over in America.
According to the legend, the ancient Olympic Games were founded by Heracles, the Roman Hercules, which was the son of Zeus. Yet the first Olympic Games for which we have written records were held in 776 BCE. In the 1998 Winter Olympics in Nagano, Japan, the rules were changed. Until 1998, Japan kept taking medals in the skiing category. Then for Nagano, the rules were changed, specifically the height rules. Japan lost this game in the skiing category as a result of the new height rule. The 2012 London Olympic Games logo have many critics saying that it spells the word Zion. This accusation led Iran's Olympic Committee to threaten to boycott the 2012 Olympic Games in protest to the supposed use of the biblical term for Israel's capital, Jerusalem. There is no doubt that this issue will affect the presence of some countries in the Games, especially Iran. Spain has found its way to becoming one of the most racist countries after fans greeted the England team with monkey chats. In the 1968 Olympics, U.S. athlete Tommie Smith won the 200-meter race with a world record time of 19.82 seconds. The U.S. athletes received their medals shoeless, but wearing black socks to represent black poverty. Smith wore a black scarf around his neck to represent black pride. Carlos had his tracksuit top unzipped to show solidarity with all blue-collar workers in the U.S. and wore a necklace of beads which he described were those individuals that were lynched. All three athletes wore Olympic Project for Human Rights badges. Sociologist Harry Edwards had urged black athletes to boycott the Games. Reportedly, the actions of Smith and Carlos were inspired by Edwards' arguments.
Between 1920 and 1926, the NFL had a total of 9 African American players. Frederick Fritz Pollard and Robert Marshall were the first African American players in what is now known as the NFL. Sports writer Walter Camp ranked Pollard as one of the greatest runners. Pollard became the first African American head coach in the NFL. In 1926, the only 5 African American players in the NFL left the league. One of these players was Pollard. It was not uncommon for colored players at this period in time to be removed in order to bring in white players. The years after that, African American players would pop up occasionally. Other minorities, such as Native Americans, played in the NFL through the 1920s. One of the most famous was Jim Throw, an athlete of mixed ancestry who was both Caucasian and Native American. The Dayton Triangles featured the first 2 Asian American NFL players, Walter Acu and Arthur Matsu, in the year 1928. Today, recent surveys have shown that the NFL is approximately 57 to 61% non-white. Many argue that there is prejudice against white players now. In the recent years, the halfback position has seen a dominance of non-white players. As of 2010, Peyton Haley is the only white start running back in the NFL.
When I say the word tennis, the first 2 images that come to mind are the Williams sisters and the Wimbledon trophy. When I say the word racism, the first 2 thoughts that come to mind are cruelty and hatred. When I say the words tennis and racism, well, the outcome is not so pretty.
Tennis, a sport that dates back thousands of years when it was first played by European monks for entertainment purposes during religious ceremonies. The sport grew in popularity and eventually expanded throughout Europe, specifically into France, where it was played by kings during the 16th and 18th century. The sport's popularity would continue to grow. Let's fast forward a few years into 1956, where a young woman by the name of Althea Gibson was making history. In 1956, Gibson became the first African American woman to win the French championships. The very next year, Gibson won at Wimbledon. Her success did not fade away as she repeated her accomplishments in 1958. It's safe to say that Althea Gibson left her mark on the tennis community. Years later, the Williams sisters would be facing their own hardships. They encountered challenges not only on the court, but off the court, especially Serena. Back in 2001, Serena Williams was competing at Indian Wells. Her sister Venus Williams and father Richard Williams were attending the match to support Serena. On their way down to their seats, the audience began to boo them as they made their way down to their seats. But why was the crowd booing at them? Was it because of the tremendous talent of the two stars, or was it because of their color?
So there you have it. Where there's race, there's racism, regardless of what sport or gender. Although the sport was initially created by peaceful people, it has drastically changed. What was once played as a ceremonial form of entertainment is now bashed with racist remarks. Will it ever stop? Will it ever change? Where do we go from here? The answer to those questions are all around us.
Since the beginning of baseball in America, there was one man who broke the racial barrier within his sport. His name was Moses Fleetwood. He joined the American League in 1884, and with extreme racism at the time, this caused a lot of anger. The first direct act of racism was on July 17, 1887, where Cap Anston refused to play with an African American player on the opposing team. After this event, we see a huge change in American baseball where the issue of race further divides teams of color with white teams. After Anston refused to play with a black player, all the teams got word of this and stopped signing black players. Because of this, Andrew Rube Foster organized the Negro National League in 1920. Teams in the Negro National League would have to go barnstorming, which is when black baseball teams would go from town to play. Unfortunately, it was hard for teams to find places to eat and sleep during their stay, especially in the South. Although many teams didn't want to sign black players, one man changed all that. Happy Chandler, the general manager for the Dodgers, was looking for a new player. He didn't want to sign just any player, he wanted a black player to join his team. On October 23, 1947, Jackie Robinson was the first black player signed to the Dodgers on a National League. After that, more and more teams started to sign black players, and eventually even the most racist teams, such as the Boston Red Sox, have all integrated black players on their team.
Soccer, the world's most popular sport. It is played in over 200 countries. It all began in 1863 in the country of England when soccer became an official sport. In the beginning, it was a predominantly white European sport. It began to spread to other nations in the late 18th century and early 19th century. As diversity grew, so did racism. It existed in the past and it still exists today. Not too long ago, Cameroonian soccer player Samuel Eto'o was insulted by racial comments behind the goal and decided to leave during the game.
Verbal comments emanating from the crowd behind that goal? I think so, Kevin. I do believe so, and I think that's what the referee came across to talk to one of the stewards about, and now Frank Rijkaard's having a word with him, trying to get him back on the field to concentrate on the game. No mas, no more. Well, if those comments are in any way racist, and it's suggested there by what Samuel Eto'o is saying there, I think he's almost pointed to Alvaro.
Another Cameroonian soccer player, Carlos Kameni, also experienced racism inside the field.
Carlos Kameni is from Cameroon in West Africa. He plays goal for the Spanish club team Espanyol, one of the strongest teams in perhaps the strongest league in the world. But even fans in his own stadium shower him with racist slurs and bananas. When I see it.
In 2005, Nike created the Stand Up, Speak Up campaign that was made in order to put a stop to racism in soccer. The campaign had support from famous soccer players like Thierry Henry and Ronaldinho.
It was not until the late 19th century that golf started to become firmly established. Although there are several claims to being the oldest club, what is not contested is that in 1894, delegates from the New Park Country Club, St. Andrews Golf Club, Yonkers New York Country Club, Chicago Golf Club, and the Shinnecock Hills Golf Club met in New York City to form what is to become the United States Golf Association. By 1910, there were 267 clubs. During the Roaring Twenties, the game expanded greatly in popularity, and by 1932, there were over 1,100 golf clubs affiliated to the United States Golf Association. In 1922, Walter Hagen became the first native-born American to win the British Open Championship, signaling the USA's dominance of the game that has yet to be seriously challenged. The expansion of the game was halted by the Great Depression and the World War II, but continued in the post-war years. By 1980, there were about over 5,000 USGA affiliated clubs, and today the total exceeds 9,700. But in the last decade or so, that is when the terrible face of racism revealed itself to the sport of golf.
In 1946, before Tiger Woods was putting his stamp on the game of golf, there was Bill Powell. After coming back from serving in the Army Air Forces in World War II, Powell wanted to return to the sport he loved, but was denied play on public courses due to the color of his skin. Powell decided that if no one was going to let him play on their courses, he was going to build one of his own. After being denied a bank loan, Powell borrowed money and built the Clearview Golf Club in Ohio, becoming the first African American to have his own professional golf course. The PGA recognized him in 2009 with the Distinguished Service Award. In 1948, black golf pioneers Theodore Rose, Bill Spiller, and Madison Gunther filed a lawsuit against the PGA for civil rights violations. Despite a settlement, the PGA changed their policy to an invitation-only format in an effort to prevent African Americans from competing in tournaments. In 1975, golf administrator and Clifford Roberts was well known for his racism and famous for the quote, "As long as I'm alive, golfers will be white and caddies will be black." In 1990, Hall Thompson may be known for developing Shoal Creek Country Club, but he is infamous for not accepting African Americans for membership into his country club. When asked about his membership policy, he said, "The country club is our home, and we pick and choose who we want. That sort of thing just isn't done in Birmingham. We have Jews, women, Lebanese, and Italians, but not blacks." The controversy surrounding Hall's comments eventually led to Louis J. Willie, a black businessman, becoming an honorary member of the club. In 1997, never one to filter himself, Fuzzy Zoeller always said what was on his mind. Unfortunately, this moment may be the one he regrets the most. After being asked about Tiger's rise to fame, Fuzzy started off by giving Tiger some very high praise for his skills on the course. In 2008, during Tiger Woods' prime, every golfer was trying to figure out a way to stop Tiger's reign over the PGA. Then, while discussing Woods' dominance with golfer Nick Faldo, the Golf Channel's announcer, Kelly Tillman, came up with the most ridiculous and racist solution ever. 2008, a little more than a week after Kelly Tillman's infamous lynching comments, Golfweek magazine decided to roll out a story on the issue with one of the most disturbing images ever to be put on a sports magazine. In 2011, with Tiger Woods not dominating like he used to, it's good to see other golfers winning the major championships. The same sentiment couldn't be shared with the people that attended the 2011 Players' Championship at TPC Sawgrass. After KJ Choi secured a victory, many of the fans turned on him, stating that they hated that an American did not win. In true gentleman fashion, Choi ignored the criticism. In conclusion, racism is without a doubt vile, obnoxious, and incredibly stupid. This country and all its population is made up of roughly the same proportion of the good, the bad, and the ugly. Anyone who has any knowledge of the history of mankind
with its continuous migrations across continents, realizes that despite outward appearances, we are all basically the same. And to claim that people from one particular place are somehow intrinsically superior to the rest of humanity is absolutely absurd.